Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first session of the day at REI Expo 3.0. The session is CEO Vision, the next big leap in the solar sector. We have a very eminent panel today, which is being chaired by Sri Manu Srivastava, IAS, Administrative Member, Board of Revenue, Government of Madhya Pradesh. We have our panelists for the day, Sri Chiranjeev Saluja, Founder and Managing Director, Premier Energies. Sri Kapil Maheshwari, President, Renewable Energy Development, Reliance Industries Limited, and Sri Manish Narula, Head of Business Development and Senior Director, Sales, Jinko Solar Company Limited. Our moderator for the day is Mr. Rohit Gadre, Solar Analyst, Bloomberg, NEF. Rohit, the session is all yours. Let's have a good session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amit. And I'll welcome all the panelists and Mr. Manuji, who's agreed to join us today. So we are going to talk about the next big leap for solar today. And we all know that India's solar capacity has grown rapidly in the last decade, which is aided by the favorable economics and by policy support. Now the government aims to have 280 gigawatts of solar installed by the year 2030, which is a 7-fold increase in less than 10 years. So new opportunities are opening up with a renewed push towards domestic manufacturing and also with the evolving strategies of the power producers. To discuss these issues, I have with me my panelists. I thank them once again for joining me. So let's dive straight away into the discussion. I'll start with Manuji. This year, once again, REWA has conducted 2 very heavily oversubscribed auctions. And one of the reasons for high interest that we understand is the structuring of the payment security. Could you explain what is unique and contrast it with what other agencies are doing in this sector?
See, the challenge of payment security, I think, is widely known, that the developers have understandable apprehensions regarding the ability of DISCOMs to pay for 25 years, I would underline that, and pay in time. I would perhaps double underline that. So it is a genuine concern. The one way that the national agencies, that is SECI and NTPC, have followed to address this concern is based on a tripartite arrangement that they have through RBI, which says that in case the DISCOMs don't pay to NTPC or to SECI or any central government undertaking the tariff payments, then it can be debited from the funds being transferred through RBI from Government of India to the respective state government. So in a way, the liability of the DISCOM becomes the liability of the state government, because if the DISCOM doesn't pay, then the state government's funds from the Government of India get reduced to that extent. This guarantee has a few limitations, I would say. It does not include termination compensation. And I would say that to address the interests of the developers for as long as a period as 25 years, it is termination compensation is a crucial issue. Furthermore, it is frankly not for the entire period of 25 years. What happens is that the tripartite agreement is not based on a particular PPA. The tripartite agreement exists outside the PPAs. Frankly, these tripartite agreements predate such a huge rollout of solar. So they have been around ever since thermal plants were there. So what happens is that these tripartite agreements have a life and they are renewed over a period of time. So when we are talking about a 25-year period, and it is foreseeable that the DISCOMs might not necessarily be owned by the state government. It's possible some of them are privatized or something, things like that happen. In that scenario, the linkage between the PPA and the tripartite agreement becomes slightly tenuous. I would also say that when we went into this as Riva Ultra Mega Solar Limited, we could have taken this fig leaf that even we were 50% owned by Government of India, because SECI owned 50% of RUMSL. So we also could have benefit of that tripartite agreement. But when we looked at the tripartite agreement, that did not look like a very convincing document to me because of the reasons that I just mentioned. So I thought that rather than going to the market with a rather weak document, why should we not go to the government and try to convince them of the utility of having a better document? And we convinced them that if you provide a better guarantee, then the DISCOMs would get a better tariff. And that finally benefits the state government. So we were able to convince the state finance department and the state cabinet and the state government. And the guarantee that we got is for the entire period, 25 years. It has no conditionality regarding the ownership of the DISCOM and the state government. And very importantly, it covers the termination compensation. So we developed the three-tier payment security mechanism. The first was an LC by the DISCOM. The second was a payment guarantee fund, which was a 3-month fund developed more like a working capital arrangement through IREDA, saying that in case the DISCOM defaults in paying to the developer, then we would dip into that working capital arrangement from IREDA and pay through that. And the backstop of that was the payment guarantee by the state government, which was both for the payments to the developer as also the payment to from the second tier, the fund that I just talked about. And the interesting part was that the payment security fund, like SECI develops a payment security fund by having a bank account where they put some funds, also some GOI allotment. We do not have any bank account. We say that in case there is a crisis, then we would draw upon a working capital, a fund, a facility that IREDA has created, and this way we would use it. So we did not have to use block some GOI allotment or some government allotment for that. We kept it as a dynamic working capital arrangement. And the interesting part is that the rate at which we got this working capital, that interest rate is lower than the punitive rate of delayed payment in case in the PPA. So in a way, in such situation, it is self-financing, and really RUMSL would actually make a small saving also when it were to so happen. So this was the payment security mechanism that we had in the Riva project, as also in the 1500 megawatt project of Agar in Shahjahanpur, which has been recently built.
Thank you so much, sir. That's a very important message, because payment security, payment delays have been a big trouble for many IPPs. I will now turn to Kapilji. Reliance, NTPC, Adani, and many other IPPs have announced very large targets over the next 10-12 years. But currently, IPPs are facing the delay in contract signing. There is some amount of cancellations and some renegotiations going on in the market. So what do you think are the top 2 things that need to be addressed to ensure that capacity can grow very rapidly?
Thanks, Rohit, for that question. I would say the topmost thing, as Manoj has already covered, we certainly need as any other large investor. You mentioned some of those names, and there are some investors who are large industrial houses from India. There are some investors who are outside India. There are some investors who are more strategic. There are some investors who are more financial. But all of them would need one aspect, that policy certainty should be there. So whatever you plan should be clear for next 25 years. So that, investors would, or maybe developers as well, could manage lower returns, but could not manage, returns which keep fluctuating, because capital doesn't come free to anyone. So whenever it comes, you need to project it. And these are all annuity projects. We all know that we have to discount 25-year cash flow, and policy certainty would be, very much required. And not that, like all other sectors, wherever the opportunities are, challenges would be there. So not that, we are burdened with challenges, but yes, policy certainty from a viewpoint which the sector has seen some bit of the gray areas in terms of GST or advance rulings, or some states defining or defaulting on payments, delays on payments, etc. While default is one thing which is largely hasn't happened, but delay is something which is being happening. And while what the scheme Manuji mentioned is one of the best what we can see in India, there has been cases even with the entities like SECI where we have signed PPAs, but the back-to-back PSAs are not yet signed. So this kind of can if not shaken up, it can deviate a little bit of the investor confidence, especially if they have not a large working experience in India. So that's one thing I would say would be required as part of this thing, that policy certainty. And then I guess the whole process also if we can simplify a little bit, the way it is simplified right now, that if there is a generation shortfall, what will happen? And if there is a generation excess, what will happen? If there's a delay on the connectivity part, what will happen? If the delay is from the developer, what will happen? If situations like what's happening right now with the manufacturers not providing deliveries on time, and because of which if there are delays, then who is responsible? So all of these also, if there are thought through process at the time of bidding, that will certainly help in expanding the way we have planned for. And we've all spoken in past on challenges which are prevalent and still continue to be applicable on land financing, etc. But that's something can cause a little bit of delay in the whole decision making, but that will not be a showstopper, or some any developer and investor will not decide just for those delays, but would look for, as I said, one of the major thing would be if we can get the policy certainty in place, that what will happen with the ALMM, what will happen with the duties, what will happen if change in law is treated is this way or that way. So the whole subjectivity, if it can go and things are a little more crystal clear. But at the same time, this sector has given opportunities, and that is the reason you have seen those larger announcements from all large players, and not only in India. You mentioned Adani, Reliance, etc. But players outside India have announced in past and right now as well. So that provides a good faith in the whole renewable story and the Indian ecosystem.
Thank you so much. I will come back to this issue of PSAs and process, I hope, in a little while. But I'll catch on to your first point, which was to do with policy certainty. And I'll go to Mr. Saluja now. So policy certainty is an issue even on the manufacturing side, because we now have a 8-month window where there is no import tax. Safeguard duty has gone and the basic customs duty is yet to come in. How does this affect the domestic manufacturers in your view?
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you, REI, for this session. So on policy uncertainty, I feel that this is becoming better, Rohit, now, because we find a clear message from the government of India that Make in India is very, very clear message from Ministry and from Honorable Minister, sir, that people who want to sell in India have to make in India. We have the BCD, which has been announced from 1st April. We have the ALMM, which is now being implemented. So I think overall, it's a very, very positive time for manufacturing, and you can see with this these kind of announcements, the kind of cell manufacturing being announced by everybody, and as Kapil said, even companies like First Solar announcing to set up shop in India. So I think the message is very clear. Coming to this 8-month period, I think yes, the manufacturers had represented to Ministry, but I don't see this to be a very big challenge. Because most of the IPPs in India had been importing from China, because we did not really have those kind of large capacities and latest products available in India. But with this coming up, everybody setting up the latest format, large format module production facilities, We all also need 2 or 3 months to really come into the market with the products. And ALMM is there to support us. And so this 8 months is, I would treat this period as a 4-month period, because as we go closer to January, people would not want to take the risk of importing just 2 months before BCD is coming in. So I feel that 8-month period issue could have been better if the government could have extended the safeguard duty, but it's not a showstopper. It's not going to stop investments into manufacturing because of the clear guidelines set by the ministry, also the PLI scheme. So I feel this is going to be really positive, that manufacturing will come up, and we will see large fabs being set up of the latest formats in India.
Thank you so much. You've raised some of the important issues around new manufacturers coming into India. But let's go now to Manish Ji, who represents one of the world's top PV manufacturers. And we'll stick to this topic of import duties for a minute. So we know from April 2022, there's 25% on cells and 40% on modules. How does this affect your future sales? And from your perspective, could this have been handled better?
Yeah, thanks, Rohit, and thanks to have this kind of question upfront to us. Actually, I would like to add from what Chiranjeev mentioned. Effectively, it is not 8 months period. For us, I think if you consider everything, it's just 1 quarter, because until 30th of July, we were not sure what is going to happen. People were just making guesswork whether this duty is going to go away like SGD or not. And BCD was always, we are aware of. So people were not placing any orders for at least this present quarter, but they were not sure of what is going to happen. And what Chiranjeev also mentioned is that last quarter, like Q1 of next calendar year, is also people are not considering. So the only available time for anybody to make some kind of shipments is the Q4 of this calendar year. So I would say effectively there's 1 quarter available, which is also coinciding with the peak demand in China, because China has its own targets and they have taken up this journey early on this year, but they are still falling short. And as per the estimates, Q4 is going to have at least 30 gigawatts of installation base only in China. So this is a situation which is a very high demand time in China and very less capacity availability for India. So effectively, even if this quarter is to be considered, there would not be too much of shipment available from Chinese manufacturers for Indian projects. Yes, unless until somebody had already planned it and placed orders beforehand, at least 3 to 4 months beforehand. I think those orders are definitely in the process. But other than that, I don't see much change happening because of this short window. And I think this will be going as business as usual for us.
Thank you so much, Manish Ji. Let's just go back to a point that Mr. Saluja mentioned. And you spoke about First Solar announcing a new plant, and there are others who are waiting to set up overseas manufacturers waiting to set up production lines in India. So as domestic manufacturers, how do you view this development, this sort of new competition coming into the India market?
So Rohit, sorry, is that for me, Rohit?
Yes, Chiranjeev Ji, for you.
So I don't take this as competition at all. It's a very welcome move. It is really going to help the Indian industry also when you have large companies like Jinko, Trina, JA coming into India. There would be collaboration in transfer of technology. There would be future, things which they are working on. So I think the message, whenever I spoke to the large Chinese companies, this was, about a year ago, this was their only question, that they wanted, stability and certainty in the policy, which is now present. So what I feel is that, yes, Chinese companies should look at, JVs or partnering with Indian companies to set up, world-class facilities here and offer the latest technology to their customers. I mean, they have done, a great job in setting up facilities in China, large capacities, and they have large customer base in India. So I think they should, it's a very positive move that they should come to India, they should partner, and they should be manufacturing locally. which would, of course, create local employment, which the government wants. And we will have the right highest quality product available in India as we all want it. So I think that's a welcome move. It's not competition.
That's a great way of looking at it. In fact, it helps the ecosystem grow, is the message that I get from Mr. Saluja. Quickly then, because he mentioned welcoming this move, I'll go back to Manishji. So can you help us understand what are the considerations in the mind of a large foreign manufacturer if they have to decide, or when they have to decide whether to set up a new production line in India? What factors go into the decision making?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is very crucial to understand at this juncture, because PLI scheme is available and there are other checks and balances in place by the government in terms of ALMM and BCD. So this is, I think, the right time and right platform for any foreign manufacturer who is keen to make business in India to look at setting up its manufacturing base. And Jinko, as part of its own expansion plan, is also considering and evaluating such kind of opportunity, which is now available in India. But to add, this is only a starting point for India by way of a PLI scheme or by way of other kind of support systems. I would say that how Jinko is looking at it is in 2 or 3 ways. One is what Manuji mentioned in the beginning is payment security. So for us as a manufacturer, we are looking at security in terms of returns. And to add to what Mr. Kapil mentioned is policy certainty. So these 2 are important factors, which these 2 gentlemen have already pointed out by virtue of the developer's point of view. But here, looking on the same side with a manufacturer's point of view, the same thing applies equally well. We need return commitment. If we invest in India, the way we have been growing outside of China, in Malaysia, in USA, Jinko have many facilities. It's not only limited to China manufacturing. Same way we are planning to look into other countries which are India or even UAE or other locations. So we have to make a balance as to which country can offer us better SOPs. While investing within India, many investors look at whether to invest in Tamil Nadu or in Gujarat or in any other state in MP, whichever state is offering the best possible support system. So same way for a global investor, they also look at which country at a present time is offering best support system. And India is definitely one of that, and we are very strongly evaluating it. On top of the PLI scheme, I would like to urge that we should not only limit it to the solar manufacturing for the modules or cells, but it should also be expanded to the level of ancillaries, because without ancillaries, without developing that overall ecosystem around solar manufacturing, we cannot succeed. So be it a glass manufacturing or backsheet manufacturing, or to some extent aluminum frame, or those kind of, or expertise in terms of skill development. So the training which is required for a solar manufacturing company to have its employees, so all of that is very much needed, and we are really evaluating, and we have made our own list of top rated states where we could target once we decide to invest. So this decision is right now at the board's level, so I would not like to comment about whether it will come through so soon or not, but definitely we are looking at it and analyzing it, and these are the factors which will govern our decision making process.
Thank you so much. Really walked us through how large companies think about certain countries, and then within those countries, what goes into making the decision on whether to invest capital or not. Let's change track a little bit now from manufacturing. I'll go to Mr. Srivastava. We know that the financial stress in the DISCOMs is seen as one of the bottlenecks for the development of the sector because of the issues you mentioned with regards to payment delays. Mr. Maheshwari also mentioned certain other issues. So having worked with the DISCOMs previously, what are the 1 or 2 key corrective measures you would recommend to make this sustainable correction in the long term?
Broadly speaking, I suppose, very broadly speaking, there are 2 issues that the DISCOMs face. One, they have to look inwards. the losses at DISCOM levels are very high. And it frankly does not require, nothing to be done at a top level for that. You don't require the World Bank or the Government of India, or even the state government for that matter. These are more things that have to be done by data analytics plays a lot of role. Where are you losing energy accounting at a feeder level and all. I mean, I have been chairman of DISCOMs for 3 years. I must be honest with you that, to say that it requires political will. I mean, see, very often you use these words without, going to nitty-gritty of it. I mean, I've never seen, chief minister or a minister ever saying that don't recover bills. I mean, I also appreciate that a real politic might demand that 3 months close to the elections, perhaps there could be a signal that let's not have extremely coercive action for recovery of bills. That might happen. But as a matter of long-term policy, for any chief minister or minister to say that we should not recover bills, I mean, gone are those days. So actually what is happening is that at the ground level, really, this is really not a problem of DISCOM. This is a failure of governance. And if you see, there is a wonderful correlation between hospitals not functioning and poor electricity bills. So where the hospitals don't function, you'd find that the electricity bills are also not collected in the same areas. So the problem is not with the structure of the DISCOMs or with the working of the health department. The problem is really the lack of governance in those areas, which are common across all departments. People don't get transferred. People are born there, study there, work there, retire there, become political leaders there. So local nexus develops. There is no major, some sort of filmy, conspiracy to keep RE away and DISCOMs and losses. It is just a lack of governance. I mean, if you look at Madhya Pradesh, for example, you would find that typically Western Madhya Pradesh does better in terms of infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate than, let's say, Eastern Madhya Pradesh or, let's say, area around Gwalior. And the same trend you would see in DISCOM losses. So that is one issue. And data analytics can play a lot of role. If you have energy accounting, these days, a lot of tools are available. For example, we had PwC working as an agency and we got inputs from them, and they were bright young kids from PwC really helped us to bring down but they would only tell us what to do. It had to be done by our staff finally. And the second issue, which doesn't get too much attention, is the delay on behalf of the state governments in paying the subsidy bill. The government takes upon itself that this constituency does not have to pay, the farmers' constituency or the poor people and so on. So the Electricity Act is very clear that in such cases, the subsidy has to be paid by the state governments. There is huge delays in payment of these subsidies by the state governments. Very often they're not paid and there is huge delays. So these two are the basic reasons why DISCOMs are in such a huge loss. But while we are talking about RE, I would also like to say that since DISCOMs face these losses, another way out is reaching out to non-DISCOM customers. When we did the REWA project, we also supplied power to Delhi Metro. So Delhi Metro gets 24% of power energy from a REWA project, and the new 1500 megawatt project that has just been bid out, in that Indian Railways is taking energy. So we need to, but I feel sad sometimes to notice that apart from these two cases, which REWA had started, and apart from these two cases, there is not one instance of a huge project which is supplying power to an institutional customer in the country. And if we really need to do that, I mean, rather than trying to force unwilling DISCOMs to procure renewable energy, we should facilitate institutional customers to procure renewable energy. And that would actually be also a partial solution to the creation of demand for indigenously produced panels. Because that is outside the WTO. Even if one were not to have any duties, a WTO allows them to be used for PSUs. there are a huge number of PSUs who are so economically active and they have a demand. But the problem is that it is not in their core competence to set up such projects. Such projects have to be set up by those people in the government who are in the RE space. And this could actually even be a partial solution to that. Another thing that I would also react to what Kapil Maheshwari ji said, I would fully agree that it is really sad that we have PPAs in which no PPS is assigned, because I would believe that in a good project, you should have identification of procurers even before you bid out, because the profile of the customer and what the bidders bid, there is a very important link between them. I talked in the beginning about payment security mechanism. So as I just said that we supplied from Rewa 3/4 of the power to Delhi Discom, Madhya Pradesh Discoms, and 1/4 to Delhi Metro. Now, the payment security mechanism was needed only for the Madhya Pradesh Discoms, not for Delhi Metro. For Delhi Metro, the LC was sufficient. So the credit profile of the strength of the procurers does have a very direct bearing to the way that bidders would look at the project. And as rightly said, that they want not skyrocketing returns, but they want projects where returns are safe. So having a good, many of our PSUs could provide that, and that could, tick more than one boxes. So that is another one suggestion I would have.
Thank you so much, sir. This really touched upon a few very key and broad points. You spoke about governance, which is really insightful because it can only come from someone who works within the government, looks across sectors as a broader view than just RE. But then you also touched upon the role of data and data analytics and what it can do. And finally, a viable alternative. I think all these three have to combine then, because without the last part being in place, the first two sort of bottlenecks will remain for some time. But solving those might then also not require so much reliance on other buyers. But that is certainly a very viable means of procurement. In fact, we are also seeing a lot of corporates ready to line up, but we'll try to get back into that later. I'll turn now to Mr. Maheshwari. If we look at solar projects in India, you have been involved in many different projects in different firms that you've worked in. There is an aggressive assumption that is made on being able to refinance these projects at attractive rates every 5 to 7 years in order to get the IRRs. So how do you perceive the riskiness of this assumption? Is this something that will cause heartache later on?
Tricky question, Rohit. I would say, India has been seeing, largely developers with two intents. First, who build it for perpetuity. So, this is 25 years and I have calculated returns based on 25 years. And then there are some set of investors who are not developers for perpetuity, but they build these assets and flip it in some time. So, and there has been a very clear indication in the way the quality parameters are considered while constructing the project with these intents in place. While this is a very generic statement what I'm making, but yes, there are instances where we have all seen that. Now with that thing, yes, there is, if I'm looking, while I'm doing all bits of engineering, as the tariffs are being competitive, even a developer needs to see how they improve on engineering, how they improve on procurement, and how they improve and save on the construction cost as well. Now, having, seen that all things are going in the other direction, we have seen module prices north side, metal prices north side, all the other construction materials which is going on a higher side. So while you do this engineering, where you figure out ways that without compromising any quality of the project, how do I save on my overall pricing to do the project? I feel there is no harm if you are considering any financial engineering as well to see that, how do I construct a project which can provide me and jump in my returns at a later date. So many of these banks or financial institutions might not provide you the options during the construction or while you are doing a greenfield project, but at the same time the options are wide open. If you look for financing or exit options, once you have an operating history of roughly 5 years of a project. So with that, you have proven that the technology works. With that, you have proven that I'm getting payments on time. And also the data speaks for itself. So, anyone from a lending perspective would value these things apart from just the credit rating, which is very important for the borrower as well as the off-taker. So that I feel, this is an assumptions with many of the developers would put in while they are bidding for the project, because who would not want an upside in their equity returns if their cost of debt improves. So, and in the whole cost of capital, maybe 70-80% is cost of debt. So you would have options where you could look for green bonds, which, now happening. People were earlier looking that, I need to have a portfolio of 1 to 2 gigawatt to evaluate options like InvIT or green bonds. Now, given that there has been instances where some large private equities have done it for some 500-600 crores or in portfolio of some 300 odd megawatts. So with keeping this in mind, keeping that, now you don't have to essentially look for in public InvIT, you can as well opt for in private InvIT. And green bonds are, available. People are looking. And then, the whole environmental, social and governance factor in the financial analysts is going that, yes, apart from just, I would go and rate my instrument for a project through credit rating agencies like CRISIL and CARE. What if they bring in the whole ESG factor in place? So why would a renewable developers who is working for this overall sustainability would not look for options where it has access to the cheaper cost of capital? So these assumptions are typically factored in now, given that there are proven instances of these things happening. And going forward also, I feel this would continue, given that there's a good amount of money from outside India also, I'm talking of largely maybe the cheaper cost of capital which is available. And that's also chasing the Indian renewable story. And if we continue to perform with some bit of deviations here and there on payment delays, but overall, the way we have done and seen the growth, I feel those options of financing after 5 years, 7 years through various options would be in the mindset even while bidding by most investors and developers.
Thank you so much. That's the real optimism that comes in when you see the amount of global capital waiting to go into green projects or ESG. There's been new records set for the last 6 months, but even last year was better than the year before despite the pandemic. So the ESG wave will certainly benefit Indian developers. I want to turn back to the manufacturing side now for a little while. Let's go to Mr. Narula. And this was mentioned by Mr. Saluja, I think, or one of the speakers, that the ALMM list is now in place. And only those on the ALMM list, only those manufacturers will be allowed to supply panels to the projects. Some people in the industry are viewing as a non-tariff barrier on imported PV modules. So, Mr. Narula, what are your views on this? Do you think that this will be the case, or do you think it will ease out over time for overseas manufacturers?
Thanks for putting up this question. I think ALMM, which is there in India, I think is similarly also available in several other countries across the globe. And we being a large global company, we face such challenges across the globe, whether in terms of certain certifications which are specific to that country, certain electric codes specific to that country, or certain special inclusion in some of the preferred list approved by the government. So in this case, it is ALMM. And as per the document which is available on the website and which we have read and we have participated on ALMM, as we understand, ALMM is open to all the manufacturers, whether they have shops in India or abroad. And specific to any particular country, it is not giving any kind of mention in any of the clauses that it has to set manufacturing shops only in India, only then it can qualify. So going by that document, which we have subscribed to, and we have paid the entire application fees, because there are different categories of application fees. One set of application fees for Indian manufacturers, another set of application fees for the manufacturers who are coming from Commonwealth countries, and third set of application fees category is from none of these two categories, which is any other global manufacturing company. So we come from that third category, and the highest fees is required to participate in that category, and we have paid. And I think, if I'm not wrong, we have paid this entire fees and applied for this ALMM scheme way back in January 2020. But unfortunately, because of pandemic and other restrictions of traveling, as we understand from MNRE, the expert panel could not travel to China to audit those factories. So, as we understand, the process is still on due to possibility of traveling within India. They audited all the factories which are available in India at present, and accordingly, in the first round of the ALMM list, they have listed all those factories which they had audited. I'm sure very soon, once the restrictions are over, we will also get a chance to get our factories audited and get ourselves into the ALMM list. So I'm looking at it very positively. And also, we are sure that there is room for every global player to participate in Indian growth story. At present, as we see, the nameplate capacity of Indian manufacturers is around 10 gigawatt or so, whereas India has to expand by at least 20 to 25 gigawatts every year. So I still believe that there is room for everyone. But having said that, we are also evaluating setting up factories within the country. So we are looking at it both the sides. But I think if we have to look at certain pain points going through ALMM, and if I may elaborate a bit on this, is that we have to find certain ways to audit global factories. This will help in 2 or 3 ways. Not only it will set some standards for the teams to understand how these global factories are running. So far, we have been audited and certified by only global agencies like TUV, UL, and all of those for certifying our factories, and also for the product certifications like IEC. But I'm yet to see any Indian agency going and auditing those global factories, and to learn from those experiences and adopt that for Indian manufacturing to bring it up to that high level of qualities. So I would urge that if Indian government could find a way out to look at some third party auditing process till the time Indian experts cannot travel from India to China. There are several global certifying agencies who are having their base within China also, and they follow all those global standards of auditing. And if Indian government look at this option of auditing Chinese factories through third-party global certification agencies and believe on their reports, very soon I think global players would also find their names in the ALMM list in the second or third round, and we could see India getting enough supplies all across the globe and making the right project development going on its right pace. So that's my limited take on this ALMM process as of now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Narula. I'll turn to Mr. Saluja now. So in the panel, we have discussed the incentives that the government is rolling out for domestic manufacturing in India, whether it's PLI scheme, whether it's the different import taxes, ALMM, and also some of the tenders that need domestic content requirement, like the CPSU scheme and others. So with this whole policy framework in place, do you believe that a gap in some ways still remains with regards to R&D and skill development of the workforce?
Rohit, I think this is a very interesting question. So, I mean, I feel that there are 2 things which are really important for this whole manufacturing thing to become a successful proposal from the government side. One, as you said, is skill development. We never had that kind of factories in India, which we are all now proposing to expand. We do need to focus a lot on skill development. We have got a very young population, engineers who can be trained. And I see that they have fantastic capabilities to learn in India. Even for our manufacturing plant, which we set up recently, we could not have the Chinese to come to India to install the equipment. And it took us, additional 3 months. But we had some very intelligent young, engineers who could really understand through, your virtual online connections and get the whole factory up and running, which I feel was a great achievement. And, we in fact are seriously thinking of having a skill development center in our fab where we could actually get, engineers from the engineering colleges, the freshers, and train them, because they need to get this kind of exposure. And there is going to be a huge requirement of skill for manufacturing in India. The other important fact is backward integration. We were very happy to hear Reliance announcement, Coal India announcement, because if we have to be truly Atmanirbhar, we do need polysilicon in wrought wafer and also ancillary factories for EVA, backsheet, glass. We hear announcements for glass manufacturing also coming in. This is required. So, the whole ecosystem, the whole supply chain has to be coming up in India, and as per the latest, products which are available in the market. So these are the two things which I feel: skill development and backward integration. These are the key factors if you want manufacturing to sustain and to be successful in India.
Thank you so much. We have spoken about a number of things that are really in the policy domain. So I'll go back to our real policy in-house, I'd say, expert, or the person who has worked with policy the most. Mr. Srivastava, we have largely talked about utility scale projects here, apart from manufacturing, but there is also an important segment on the rooftop side. And one of the ways in which Madhya Pradesh has really taken this forward is in the way that it has gotten interest from some of the bigger players who do not usually participate in rooftop auctions. So could you suggest how other auctioning agencies can learn from what your experience has been in attracting these players to also come into the rooftop auction space?
Essentially, what we did was that we gave rooftop the same respect as one gives to ground-mounted projects. It is understood that in ground-mounted projects, you need to address the risks and uncertainties of the developers. I think it's a natural extension that the same respect needs to be accorded to rooftop developers as well. So our efforts were essentially to mitigate the risks and uncertainties for rooftop developers, and also to appreciate that all risk perhaps cannot be mitigated or finished. So to apportion it at the right place, whoever is for example, the risk regarding net metering and gross metering. Now that is a burden, that is something for the consumer to handle. So we kept the relationship entirely behind the meter. And whatever might be the net metering rules, the rooftop developer would be paid only on the number of units produced, only on the generation meter. So that was made very, very simple. Similarly, what we did was, essentially what we relied was on a robust project preparation. Usually the pattern in India in rooftop projects is that you do a bid, then you ask the developer to go all around the state, trying to convince engineering colleges and medical colleges that why don't you get a rooftop on your floor on this document? This is a 300-page document. Please sign on every page, and then we would give you power at this rate. So, which I realized is a very onerous task for a developer to, I mean, imagine someone walking into the principal of an engineering college, thrusting a 300-page document into his hand and saying that, you see, there is an organization called this with an office in Delhi, it's the Government of India organization. We won their bid number so-and-so. And under that bid, kindly sign this. So we did not expect our developers to do that. We aggregated the buildings beforehand. And the bid was for those buildings. In our bid, there was a data room. So one tender was for 230 government colleges. Those 230 government colleges were not just in district headquarters, they're also in taluk or tehsil headquarters. Not even Commissioner Higher Education would have ever traveled to all these places. So it was impossible for the bidder to ever have traveled to all those places. But what we had was that we had 230 folders in our data room. Each folder was for each government college. For each folder, there was a Google map of that building. And there was a pre-engineering design, which had the detailing that you would need that many modules, that many panels, and this much of copper wire, this much meter of copper wire. So the exact capital requirement to capital cost from the bidder was known when he went in for bidding. So they saved on two primary things. One was the marketing cost of trying to convince the colleges of various engineering college, principals of various engineering colleges. With respect to the principal of my engineering college, I was an engineer by education. So the marketing aspect, and the second is the pre-engineering aspect. And furthermore, through the contractual terms, we ensured that the payment of the developers is assured. We had things like termination compensation. We had things like partial commissioning, which no one had ever thought of, because medical college is also possible has 6 different buildings. You could have commissioned 5 and not got the 6th because the roof was never made available to you. So earlier in India, partial commissioning was allowed for big ground-mounted projects, but no one had thought of partial commissioning for rooftop projects. So, and essentially what we did was that we heard each complaint or each issue raised by the bidders. We took our pre-bid meeting seriously. We had innumerable iterations to our documents. Our principle was that unless there is a strong reason to say no, we would accept each request made by our bidders, because we thought that our bidders know their job better than we know their job. They would know better what holds them back from investing in our project. They would know better than us that what are the risks, what are the uncertainties, and it is our responsibility to address the risks and uncertainties as perceived by them. So that was the philosophical motto that we had, not only in RIVA, but in our rooftop projects as well. And we got the lowermost rates in the country. And I'm very happy to share with you that now Niti Aayog is replicating our project in all health institutions all across the country. They're using the same documents, etc. But the basic principle was the same, that we need to respect the bidders, take their concerns seriously, and hopefully then you can have a good project.
Again, very interesting on the ground insight provided by Mr. Srivastava. And he spoke about attention to detail and risk mitigation as the two very key criteria. Just building on that, I will take those principles and apply it elsewhere. I'll go to Kapilji. So India's solar projects have some of the lowest LCOEs in the world. And we know that financing costs in India are not the cheapest in the world. So with this regard, do you think that the quality of projects or their ability to consistently provide that output over 25 years is some sort of concern, or is that being taken care of by the IPPs and EPCs?
Sorry, I was on mute. So before I answer, I would just add and appreciate, what Chiranjeev just mentioned. And just to add, what Manuji was also saying, while we are doing every bit of it for the Atmanirbhar, we also need to do a little bit towards the Atmanirekshan. That, where do we stand to become this Atmanirbhar? And that is where I would, the whole idea of telling that is where I would try and, build the answer to your question, what you just asked, while not that we have been building any substandard projects in India. Otherwise, many of those projects have, seen 2-3 hands by now. It was first built by someone, later on sold to someone, and later on again. So there are projects which are 10-12 years old as well. some of the recent projects, where we have seen bits of, 1.99 to 2.3, etc. And yes, as you rightly mentioned, these are some of the lowest LCOE. But, this is far, far behind compared to where the world is seen, Of course, we do have to see that the cost of capital is substantially higher compared to what we see in Middle East and some of the other countries where we have seen those lowest tariffs making rounds. And, again, we all see that, oh, this is crazy. Now the tariffs have gone to these levels. But at the same time, any investor which is investing crores of rupees of money would definitely do their homework before quoting in tariffs. Not that they don't understand their business. Even if these are financial investors, they would be backed by a good technical team or an external consultant who is technically that well that they can, model it in a way that, yes, this is the tariff I can go towards. So while we have seen LCOEs or the tariffs going down, and but so far what has supported in this whole journey was the fact that the module prices were going down, and we were able to get rid of something called what was present in the initial days when we were doing solar, which was a little bit of over engineering, and we are doing a little bit of value engineering now. So that the whole value engineering aspect is very well known to most EPC companies as well as developers, that what needs to be done and what is enough to be done for in particular land parcel, for in particular wind speed, for a particular location, to maximize my generation and minimize my LCOE. So not that we have been compromising on the way we are making the assets, but yes, there have been instances where either because of ignorance or because you have made the assets so that, okay, for a particular reason, then there were assets for simple reasons like taking accelerated depreciation benefit. I have no other business to be a renewable developer but just do that. So if your intents were, any pure play IPP would take a very, very justified call before compromising anything on the asset quality, because tomorrow, even when you are, building these assets to flip it in 5 years, you certainly feel that there has to be a buyer to that in 5 years, and any buyer would do their due diligence as well. So during the technical DD, it will come out. So not that we are able to, but yes, what Indians we have done very, very nicely is that we have tried and utilize our engineering skills. So as to see, we have seen journeys, at least I have been part of the journey where I have seen in India the module mounting structures which are 190 tons a megawatt to now what we have been seeing now of 20 to 25 tons a megawatt. So, all of that we have seen module prices going on from, maybe at least during beginning of National Solar Mission from, $1.50 to $2 also to now, sub 30 cents as well. So there have been an, supporting factor. Plus, most of these projects in India have happened at places where the generation potential is high. So we all know that people have chosen places where irradiation is good, and that is the reason we have seen states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, Gujarat, MP, etc. have seen the growth journey what they've seen right now, and they'll continue to do that because land is available as well as the irradiation is good in these places. So it will continue to happen. And overall, even with a little bit of higher cost of capital, and to balance the increasing of overall project, maybe for whatever reason, the decreasing trend in the financing rates have helped a little bit in achieving financial closure despite an increase in the capital cost of setting up a project. So it has been a little bit of mismatch. Of course, the rates have not fallen to an extent. The CapEx have gone up, but at the same time, even for keeping the same returns, we are able to achieve the LCOE primarily because and the proof of that is in, seeing the data. Even after imposition of BCD, even after seeing that what's happening, and module prices, we have seen shipping trends, we have seen polysilicon, everything, and then also the tariffs are at 2.33 in the recent tenders, etc. So and people who are quoting that we have to have a faith in their intelligent abilities as well, because no one would risk substantial amount of money without doing an analysis. So I still feel that these are justified LCOEs, and people who have quoted that have done their homework very, very diligently. And that is the reason we are seeing those results, what we are seeing in tenders. And not that the tenders are, most of these tenders are oversubscribed. So we've just seen, what Manuji was saying for the MP thing, and for an 300, 400 megawatt, if you get 1500, 2000 megawatts of interest, and beyond that, then you see that yes, everything correctly put together, even those tariffs are making sense. So
great points there, Mr. Maheshwari. He's covered a lot of ground to show us why it's really been a journey that has involved many factors, whether it is overall drop in equipment prices, the engineering expertise of the IPPs and the workforce here, and also because of the improvements that have been made during this process, really accessing different available benefits, technologies, and the right intent. And the proof, like you said, is in the things that we see. The tariffs are falling, the assets are regularly getting flipped. We have not seen a slowdown in that, even despite what has happened in the last year and a half. I'll turn now to Mr. Saluja. You recently inaugurated a new factory, and your long-term target is to have 3 gigawatt cell and module capacity. So, given this whole discussion, what is it really that, or what are the factors that could lead to an acceleration of your timeline, or really an increase in what you would like to build in your production capacity?
So I think everything is set, for all of us to grow in manufacturing capacities. What I would like is that the policies which have been announced should be there to stay for some time till we reach economies of scale in India. 3 gigawatt is still nothing compared to the facilities which you see in China. So we need large facilities to come up, as I told you, the whole ecosystem to come. So one is, policy stability is really important. And then, ease of doing business, as what, Manuji also said, that, our payment securities, if in terms of PLI, will really add to a lot of investment coming in. One good thing of investment coming in from outside is also governance. We see when money is coming from outside, governance is a really key factor. Respect to labor. We have seen this issue which recently came up in US on the Xinjiang province in China, where they have banned exports from those provinces in China. We don't have such issues in India, so it'll really help in bringing more employment and respectable employment coming into getting to these engineers who really need these jobs. And so policy stability, very important. Creating the whole ecosystem, maybe manufacturing parks, which the ministry is talking about, where we could go and set up expansion in those facilities. There is large expansion coming up in Dholera, so closer to the port. This could also, create a lot of export possibilities from India. So these are my asks from the ministry to keep this going in a very stable manner.
Thank you. I'll let Mr. Srivastava take the last word on this. We have heard about Atmanirbhar. We have heard about the good things that policy support has provided. You've also spoken about your experience in how things can be structured properly. What is your take on how do you see renewables in this Atmanirbhar? Do you think it will be roaring success? Do you have any words of caution for this? Where do you see this journey for renewables in the wider Atmanirbhar goal that India has?
I think the Atmanirbhar aspect is also very important, because if there is one criticism that renewable in India has been facing, it is been precisely this issue. And even otherwise, we realize that we do need a push to our industries, and there have been certain other areas. If we talk of, let's say, fab facilities for semiconductors and all that, we have tried as a country earlier and things have not been successful. So there are certain areas we definitely have to identify. If you look at a broader, just go beyond RE. If you look at as an RE enthusiast, then one would say that we should allow RE projects. And I respect that viewpoint as well, which says that you should allow unhindered access of solar panels and other equipments from all across the world, because that leads to lowering of cost of power. And that also helps the economy and all other industries, and also helps climate change. That is a valuable insight, a valuable viewpoint as well. However, at the same time, we also realize that government is recognizing that we need to give a conscious, concentrated push to economy, to industry. Of course, we have certain broad areas in the economy which we focus on, say insolvency, banking, there are broad level reforms. But apart from that, there are certain industries which we as a country has decided that we would focus on that. And as Sarvaji rightly said, that we need to create an ecosystem for that. So if we talk of one thing, I mean, we talk of, let's say, a floating solar. Now, floating solar cannot grow in isolation. We need to have a plastic perhaps park in, and so we need a concentrated view on that how should we develop that industry. So the ecosystem needs to develop. And if there are few, and after especially the COVID crisis that happened, there is a realization all across the world that we should be broadening our channels of supply of raw materials. And when one looks at those countries, people are wanting to look beyond China. Vietnam is an obvious choice, and Vietnam, which started on the path of economic liberalization along the same time as India, has actually moved much faster. But when we move beyond Vietnam, there have to be countries that have come up, and India is such an obvious candidate. So we need to address those issues as to why it is not happening. One of the things which have surprised no one mentioned is the cost of power. And the solar fabrication needs energy, such a major cost in that. And solar energy is such an obvious solution to that. The only hindrance is our regulatory mechanism that does not allow solar energy to be, and that restricts open access, and so you can allow solar energy as long as it's being produced in-house in the same premises. So, and that also the recent regulations limit to 1 megawatt. So obviously, I mean, the scales we are talking about, it is really meaningless. So there is an obvious solution here, that cost of power is a major problem. Why are we not being able to compete with Vietnam? And one of the major reasons, power cost. Solar energy can really directly provide that. So even if we are unable to provide open access across the board, at least we could identify some sectors which are nation's priorities, and we could allow open access for them. And essentially, these policies need to be developed in sync with industry, as I said, by giving respect to the industry. I mean, we talked about experience. I mean, in government, you work in various sectors, and there's some sectors where you can look back and be proud of. And at the same time, there are also endeavors that you have been involved in, which are embarrassing. So I would say that the embarrassing endeavors are those where we stood on podiums, we went on part of road shows all over the world, and we made commitments, and which we as a nation felt that we have not been able to live up to those commitments. So I remember there were rounds of bidding of oil and natural gas. There were SEZs where very often we have sectoral issues. In SEZs, Commerce Ministry would issue a notification which the Finance Ministry would not allow. In the case of NELP rounds in oil and natural gas, the similar issues are faced. So we as a country, perhaps, and we as a government, I mean, looking from the outside, it might seem the government is one unit. When you live inside the government, you realize that government is as complicated as society itself or as the international community itself. So perhaps we need to have concentrated, integrated solutions to various challenges, including if we identify certain sectors of the industry, want to focus them. Here talking of Atmanirbhar in terms of RE manufacturing. We need to talk to the industry to find out their concerns. For example, I gave the example of fab manufacturing. One of the reasons perhaps we failed was that the solutions we gave were not what the fab manufacturers were seeking. We gave some other solutions. So we have to get out of this habit. I mean, in government, very often someone had once told me that power should flow out of knowledge. In India, we think that knowledge flows from power. Just because you are in a powerful position does not mean that you have the right solutions. The right solutions have to come from the industry. We have to talk to them, understand their problems, respect their views, and try to incorporate them as far as possible. It's absolutely understandable that government cannot accept everything that the industry is demanding, but at least it should follow an intelligent understanding of what the industry is seeking and why is it seeking so, and whether it is in the good of overall industry what is being asked. I don't know whether it replied to your question, but yes.
Thank you so much, Manuji. It was really the kind of conclusion that we wanted to this panel, because while we spoke a lot about renewables, it also affects and interacts with the wider environment that we live in, the country that we live in, and the realities of this. I thank you so much, Mr. Narula, Mr. Maheshwari, Mr. Srivastava, and Mr. Saluja for your insights. I hope the audience has enjoyed it as much as I did. There are a lot of takeaways and insights that I got from here, and I hope everyone else did too. Amit, over to you.
Yeah, thanks to the organizers. Yeah, thank you so much.
A big thank
you so much.
Session chair.
Thanks, REI, for calling us. Thank you so much.
Manuji, in fact, we would also like to thank you from REI side, from Informa, for supporting us for all our RE initiatives. It was a pleasure to have you, and thank you for your time. I'm also thankful to all our panelists, Mr. Chiranjeev Saluja, Mr. Kapil Maheshwari, and Mr. Manish Narula for their time and for the lovely discussion. Rohit, you were excellent, and thank you for going an extra mile, connecting and extracting a fruitful discussion, covering all the points in the value chain. We look forward to have you all at REI from 15th to 17th of September. And to all our audience, the next session starts at 2 p.m., which is policies to fast-track deployment of EV charging infrastructure in India. Please join us at the hour. And meanwhile, please visit the booths at the expo floor. Thank you once again to all our panelists and to the moderator. Thank you, sir. Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.